Welcome to the fourth and final day of the India Land Forum 2020. We are delighted to have you with us, both those who are on screen as panelists and those who are attending as our guests to this event that we have started for the first time at NCER. My name is Shekhar Shah. I'm the Director General of NCER. And as we have done in the past 3 days, we have a spectacular group of researchers and policy analysts who are going to share their work with us today. I won't go into the details of the program, it's with you. All I want to say is that through the course of these 3 days, the sessions that I have attended have really brought home, to me at least, the very deep need for such a forum where we can actually collect and share work and data and evidence that can drive land policy, property rights, with special emphasis on gender, on the underprivileged, on returning migrants, a range of issues that really are crying out for attention. And indeed, the pandemic has thrown these even into sharper relief, and the need is even greater. So, this event has been both timely as well as extremely valuable, at least for me and certainly the team at NCER. Um, I don't want to take up time at the beginning, but again, welcome, and we look forward to having you with us till the end of the day, which will be the final day. Let me pass on the baton to Shomnath Sen, who's going to conduct the proceedings from here on. Before I end, I want to again thank the Omidyar Network India. We have Shreya Deb with us, who's Director of Investments at Omidyar, for their valuable and generous support for this event, but also for the entire body of work that NCR has been doing, and indeed members of the Property Rights and Research Consortium have been doing, which they have also supported. So again, thank you, Omidyar Network India. Shumnath?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shekhar. Welcome to all to this sixth session of the India Land Forum. Uh, we have two very interesting presentations on urban land and property. Uh, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Ram Singh, who will chair the session. Uh, Dr. Ram Singh is at the Delhi School of Economics. He holds a PhD from JNU and a postdoctoral degree in economics from Harvard University. He has taught at Brown University, University of Hamburg, JNU, and Delhi School of Economics. And he's a Commonwealth Fellow at LSE, the London School. He also co-edits the Indian Economic Review, and his research interests are contract theory, public economics, public-private partnership, and economics and the law. So Dr. Ram Singh, over to you to introduce the presenters and the discussant and conduct the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Somnath, for this generous introduction. I am happy to chair this session. I welcome you all to the sixth session of India Land Forum. This session is on urban housing and land. Professor Kala Sridhar. She is literally speaking a household name when it comes to cities, planning, urban housing, and related issues. Professor Sridhar is a professor at ISEC, Bangalore. She has been Fulbright scholar. She has visited several universities in the US and Europe. She has contributed to most leading journals in the area of urban economics, urban studies. Second speaker in this session is Jayashree Kurup. Jayashree is also a household name. At the moment, she is with Magicbricks.com. But prior to this, she has been extensively writing on cities and urban housing and related issues. She has written in Times of India, Economic Times, Financial Express, and she has also headed research initiatives in India and abroad, including China, Thailand, Philippines, and Japan. So it's a as a discussant for these presentations. And Shreya is with Omidyar Network. She looks after the investment initiative at Omidyar, and her focus of her work, her organization is on property rights, securing property rights, especially from the perspective of women and marginalized sections of society. So without taking much of the time, I invite Professor Kala Sridhar to make a presentation. Each speaker, Professor Sridhar, you have 20 minutes, and we will have remaining time for question and answers. Over to you, Professor Sridhar. Hello?
No, we can't hear you. You must be muted.
Hello? Kala, we can't hear you. You need to unmute. I can see that you have muted your mic.
Okay. Okay. Am I audible now?
Now, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. I thought that I didn't have a privilege to unmute even today because all the other days I was not seen and I could not speak. So, okay. Thank you for this opportunity. First of all, I should say I'm delighted to be part of the NCAER based on my past association with Dr. Shashanka Bide and also with Dr. Devendra Gupta. And NCAER was the first organization that gave me a job offer from India. So I really have a lot of fond things to remember about NCAER. And I'm also really very privileged to be associated with the NCAER because of this pioneering effort they have made in data gathering in the form of the MISH, the Market Information Survey of Households, the initiative with the University of Maryland, the India Human Development Survey, and so forth. So I'm really happy to be here. And thanks to Dr. Devendra Gupta for inviting me this time to be part of this land workshop. Thank you very much, Dr. Ram Singh, for your kind introduction of this. And I'm really humbled by this. And this is a paper which I'm very intrigued about because we were traveling in the US a couple of years ago, and we stayed just in these homestay platforms, these accommodations called as Airbnb, right? And it really intrigued us as to what the effect is of this digital platform on housing markets, right? Both the rental market and also the home sale market, and that is what we explore here. So I hope I have the privilege. Okay, this is the background. So the background.
Kala, would you mind turning on slideshow so we can see your slides fully?
Yes, yes, certainly.
Thank you.
Is this better now? Is this better?
Yes, excellent.
Okay, okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
no, you've gone back. Yeah, thanks.
No. Okay. So the theoretical basis for aggregator platforms like Airbnb is what is called as two-sided markets, which was first like explained by Jean Tirole, and he won the Nobel Prize for this work. And there are many examples of two-sided markets, and I would like to show you a picture which demonstrates two-sided markets which connect job seekers with job providers. Like here, cab seekers and cab drivers are Ola, Uber kind of things, information seekers and product service providers like Sulekha.com, and buyers and sellers like Amazon, patients and doctors like Practo, and readers and publishers. So there are many examples of two-sided markets. And Airbnb is a very typical example of the homestay digital aggregator platform. Airbnb, for those of you that don't know, is a very good example of the sharing economy of cities. It demonstrates the sharing economy of cities, whereby any property owner has excess or surplus space in their house, can rent it out for guests who are willing to come and visit them, and they get a rent, of course, like a hotel does. And so the guest gets to experience the local cuisine and local culture of the place where they are staying, and they also get accommodation at a reasonable price, and the host basically gets a financial incentive and also the additional social incentive of meeting new people. And what is the effect of Airbnb? on the supply of land and also on the housing market more generally. This has because Airbnb basically withdraws housing units from the rental market, right? So it bids up the price of rental housing in general. And what about owner occupied housing? It also in general bids up the price of owner occupied housing, because now the house in which house which you just bought can be used not only for living, but also it has an investment effect, right? So you can rent it out also, I mean, for short term guests, and you will see very soon why that is the case. So this is a win-win situation for both the tourist and also the host, but it has a lot of distortionary effects on the rental housing. So what about Airbnb in India? Airbnb in India is an emerging market, and also, I mean, the COVID pandemic is the wrong time to really start understanding the effects of Airbnb, because that would be really a very low season for travelers, tourists, and also for hosts willing to accommodate such people. But in general, Airbnb has more than 50,000 plus properties listed in various cities and various places of the country for guests and tourists. So it is really a very, very emerging market. And because of the affordable housing crisis in this country, and what with government programs failing to really fill up this gap, there is a lot of vacant housing units, and also there is a lot of affordable housing crisis at the same time. So Airbnb aggravates all this quite a bit, which is a reason why we need to understand this. Uh, as far as research questions are concerned, we would like to understand what is the extent of Airbnb's penetration in urban India. One, because of the urban housing affordable crisis that we are talking about. And what is really the effect of Airbnb on rental housing and housing prices? That is when you want to sell the house or when you're trying to buy a house. And as I said earlier, the cities in which Airbnb is active would have a higher price of their rental housing, and the housing price would also be more expensive because they were presumably withdrawn from the market, rental market, and also because of the investment uses, incentives of the housing that one is seeking to buy. Now, we found that the existing studies on Airbnb like are very, very limited in the Indian context. There are a lot of studies in the context of the US. For example, this study by Waxmouth 2018 on New York City found that because in cities, because of the effect of Airbnb, it drove up the prices of rental housing in New York City by nearly about $385 on average, right? Annual average. And Barron et al., they found, they looked at the 100 largest metro areas in the US, and they, I think, found that a very small 0.02% increase in the rental and also the housing price of these cities in the US. And Lee 2016 looked at the effects of Airbnb on housing in Los Angeles and found that it exacerbated the housing crisis in that city. Now, there is also some effect, I mean, research of the effect of discrimination on housing. Taking the case of Airbnb, Edelman and Luca basically found that non-black hosts charge systematically more for an Airbnb rental compared with actually black hosts. That is one finding interesting from viewpoint of social uh, from the effect on society. The effect of Airbnb on hotels and accommodation is very obvious. That Airbnb is a direct competitor to hotels and accommodation in cities, so it would drive down the prices of hotels and accommodation, which would try to compete with these kind of homestay aggregators. So now Verma et al. 2016 is the only kind of Indian study we found, but that is just a very anecdotal kind of study which looks at whether Airbnb is just a passing fad or is it really promising from the viewpoint of India. So given this limited data, I and my co-author, we wrote a newspaper article and we were really enthused by whether or not Airbnb affects rental housing or the housing market in general. So we looked at the Airbnb website in India, and we got information on the Airbnb number of properties and rents in about 200 cities of the country. Basically, these are all the cities in which Airbnb has a presence. And we did a search for the number of properties by saying that a couple wants to live here the following weekend of the search, and they want an entire home for themselves, right? Because the search options also enable you to choose just one room or one room with an attached bathroom and things like that when you want to look for a tourist accommodation. So these are the filters we applied on the search. And the research question one is basically the data source for that is Airbnb number of properties, and the rent was also available, right? The average rent for an Airbnb property in Bengaluru, in Mumbai, in Delhi, Nagpur, Surat, and so forth, right? That's how we got it. And for the research question two, what is the effect of this on housing markets? We looked at makan.com. Actually, Jayashree is here. She'll be presenting after me. So she would be curious, I mean, intrigued to know that we could not find this data on Magicbricks, but we found this on makan.com, which is actually a very highly rated portal for housing transactions in India. Actually one of the top 10. And the data sources, other data sources, so makan.com was used for data on housing prices per square feet for the housing sale and purchase. And makan.com was also used for housing rental for single BHK, 2 BHK, 3 BHK. Airbnb's website was used for a number of properties and rents for the Airbnb. And I use some of my own data on land use regulations on the FAR, the floor area ratio, because that also determines the affordability of housing, as I've argued elsewhere. And we looked at the census of India for some general controls like Pakka roads, public services, right? Pakka roads per square kilometer of land, distance to a large city. Okay, so those are my data sources. So now, how many minutes do I have, Dr. Ram Singh? It's about 5:20 now. So I've lost track. 10 more minutes or?
You have 8 minutes.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Okay. So descriptive statistics. So you will see that here the number of Airbnb properties are 181 among the 200 cities, and this is a potential problem. The maximum that you see for 300. See, many cities like Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, and all have much higher numbers of properties getting listed on Airbnb. But this Airbnb website, probably for business secrecy reasons or something, was truncating this at 300. This is one disclaimer that I would like to flag here. And we were also able to get data on Airbnb rent. This is in rupees per night. So this basically means that 4,800 rupees was the approximate Airbnb nightly price for a property with the characteristics that I was describing. So this basically means that assuming the 20 days in a month is basically occupied, right? So 4,800 per night times about 20, it's about 96,000 rupees is the income that a host can expect from an Airbnb rental, right? And this is when you compare this to the possibility of renting it out like to a tenant, that will be only like I don't know, maybe 15,000, 20,000, and whereas 96,000, right? So there are a lot of financial incentives for the host to rent this out for Airbnb and short-term accommodation. So the other things I would like to just highlight the fact that the residential FAR is something on which I had only 39 observations when I merged this with the Airbnb data set. So it's only about 40 observations here. And FAR is quite restrictive in Indian cities, as I've argued elsewhere. So it's really 1 to 4 with a low level equilibrium of like about 2.44. And now the single BHK, these are all from makan.com. Single BHK, 2 BHK, 3 BHK rent, this is the mean. You will find that it's systematically higher in every case, the average rent in single BHK, 2 BHK, 3 BHK, which is to be expected. And the maximum house prices per square feet, no surprises in Mumbai, and this is the average, and this is the ratio of Pakka to city land area, and this is much lower than the norm set by the high powered expert committee of 11% they set, and there's only about 8% for Indian cities, and these are the other things. So I just want to summarize my regressions of rent and house price on Airbnb and other characteristics. On single BHK is the first column, 2 BHK is this column, 3 BHK and housing price. So now what I find is that the Airbnb number of properties has a statistically significant impact on the single BHK apartment rental, as we expect, to the extent of increasing it by 23 rupees as the monthly rent. And the Airbnb number of properties is basically also increasing the price of the 2 BHK by about 24 rupees monthly rent. And the Airbnb number of properties doesn't have an effect, but the Airbnb rent has an effect, positive as we expect, and significant on the 3 BHK, but the economic significance of this is much lesser. And the house prices, Airbnb doesn't have any effect. Now the number of observations was really small because of the residential FAR, and the FAR, I would have expected this to have a negative effect, which it is in these two cases, but it is not statistically significant. Higher the FAR, lower will be the rent, and lower will be the house price, but it's not statistically significant. Now, because of the sample size constraint imposed by the FAR, I removed the FAR and I re-estimated these regressions for each of these. And you will see that the number of observations increases considerably. And here what we find is that Airbnb number of properties has continues to be positive and significant, but the economic significance, the magnitude is quite less. But the 2 BHK apartment price continues to be at about 24 rupees extra per month for cities where there is one extra Airbnb property listed. And you will find that the Airbnb number of properties also has a positive and significant impact by to the extent of increasing the house price per square feet to the extent of 48 rupees extra, where there is one extra Airbnb property listed in that particular city. So this is my last slide. What are my conclusions? These are very, very preliminary as I'm working on some revisions of this work. And we find that the number of Airbnb properties is significant on 1 BHK and 2 BHK apartments when FAR is controlled for, and Airbnb rent has a significant effect. The nightly rent has a significant effect on the monthly rental price of 3 BHK apartments when FAR is controlled for. And we find statistically and economically significant effects of Airbnb number of properties on house prices when FAR is not controlled for. And some limitations of this work are, of course, that the Airbnb number of properties and Airbnb rent could be correlated. They are endogenous, and Makan.com is definitely a highly ranked website, but that was the only website from which portal from which we could get data on housing rents and prices. But they are quite reasonable, as I showed you. Single BHK, 2 BHK, 3 BHK, they are quite reasonable to expect given what we know about housing in these cities. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope that I have taken the time allotted to me. Dr. Ram Singh, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Excellent time management. You have been super efficient. Thank you. Thank you, Kala.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ram Singh.
I invite Jayashree Kurup to present her work. Jayashree?
Can you see my presentation?
We can, yes.
Let me quickly start by saying that we're talking about we are trying to understand what makes people buy residential plots that are outside the spatial planning framework. Okay. I've used a lot of Magicbricks statistics here. So why do buyers purchase illegal plots? Now, let me put it into context. About 2 years ago, Magicbricks found that the demand for plots had gone up significantly. So we tried to figure out what was happening, and then we identified the top cities where there was demand for plots, and we put them into, we broke up the cities into different corridors on which plots were coming up. Now, we found that a lot of the illegal plots, the plots that were not fully converted and so on, were in the peripheral areas, mostly in the peripheral, just outside the city limits, very close to IT corridors and very close to transport corridors. But a lot of it was non-converted land. So we said, why do these buyers purchase this? There are 3-4 reasons that we came to. One was that they wanted plots. The demand for plots is very high. The small cities in India, the natural tendency is to buy plots because they have a very strong bonding with land. But they wanted cheaper plots. And what's available in the city was very, very expensive plots. As the city grows, as the city demand grows, the plots had become very expensive, and sometimes it was not even available. So they went for cheaper plots, and cheaper plots are available in the periphery. I'll discuss later on why it is cheaper. Then they know that illegal plots can be legalized. Every city in the country has been legalizing properties that are not, they don't buy illegal properties, but it can be legalized eventually. So that it was a question of when it will be legalized rather than if it will be legalized. A khata becomes, B khata becomes A khata. There is unauthorized colonies which become authorized. So they don't bother about the illegality because they know eventually they can get around the system. The fourth reason was that many people don't intend to stay. It is an investment, especially in cities like Hyderabad, where everybody buys a piece of land near any corridor of growth. Once they've bought it, it's a disposable surplus where there is high risk, high return. If you take risk, you enter at a time when the market is not even active, and you buy at throwaway rates. And as soon as the driver is up, the IT corridors, the industrial corridors are up, or there's an airport which has come up, they can encash and they can get better returns. So these are the 4 reasons why buyers were purchasing illegal plots. Now, the demand for plots, the small cities, the demand is very high. When that city grows, even cities like Gurgaon, Pune, even Bangalore to a certain extent, these were cities which had a different profile. When they became big, and a few layouts were developed by the development authorities. Now, as land value appreciates, fewer and fewer plots are released. And then what happens is that the demand exceeds supply significantly. The value, while the city's master planned area, the values are already high. Just outside the master planned area, the values are still high because it's just a boundary that you have to cross, but it is cheaper. And it is unconverted land. So the farmers and small developers, they plot the unconverted land parcels. It's almost like cookie cut, and it is along connectivity corridors, job hubs, or premium areas. This is something that I evolved myself, but we've been studying plots for such a long time. I did this when I worked with NCAER in a previous land initiative, just around the time when the Delhi master plan was being evolved. So what happens is there's a new project, the plots are sold, the prices are low. Then some apartments are released. There is some built up property, the vacancy goes up, so the unit prices go up. The occupancy goes up, so the unit price goes up. As the unit price goes up, apartment values are up, the plot values also start rising. There's a critical value that is reached, then the investors exit, because whoever came in for the returns are getting their returns now, and the end user starts buying and the living starts. This I've seen in city after city. This is the pattern that we have noticed. So then what is that illegal conundrum? The ideal demand, this is something that I'm taking from Mr. V. Suresh, who was the former CMD of HUDCO. He, in around the 2003-2004, had evolved this concept of, if there is one premium house, there should be 2 middle income, 3 lower income, and 4 economically weaker sections. He calls it the 1, 2, 3, 4 principle. I have tried it out in city after city, in market after market, and I found the efficacy to be perfect. So if you look at this model, the 4 of economically weaker section and 3 of lower income, which means 70% of people are not planned for. Cities don't plan so much for the LIG and the EWS. It's a very recent phenomenon. Even with the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, we did have one of the papers talking about it. A lot of that has been beneficiary-led housing, and we haven't seen the kind of stock that should be coming up in the cities. So EWS and LIG, when those people want to stay in the city, they will mostly pick up grabbed land, where there are no planning norms, and it is in the low-rise format. So the land is not very well utilized, but they get some place to park themselves in, and this becomes there are some people who take it, buy it, build on it, lease it out after a period of time. They become they rise in the value chain, they move to legal colonies, and these unauthorized colonies, they know that eventually they get authorized and they remain low rise. And I have seen that authorization means that you have to pay a penalty, but that penalty is rarely used for that planned infrastructure and the value creation that has to happen. So LIG and EWS has been traditionally associated with poor infrastructure. Low prices, cheaper houses means poor infrastructure. This is an important thing which I want you to keep remember, because I'm going to address this a little later. So when they move to the peripheries, the city land is overpriced. Peripheral landowners have cookie cut unconverted land. This is normally 45 to 50% cheaper than converted plots. One, because there is no compliance to planning norms. The road width is 3 to 6 meters. It should be at least 9 to 30 meters, 35 meters. It is 3 to 6 meters. Septic tanks are substitute sewerage lines. Since it is not in the formal development system, trunk infrastructure like power, water connection, sewerage, and drainage is not there. But go back to what I said earlier, lower income and EWS and LIG are used to living in squalid conditions. Therefore, here, at least they own the land, right? If they buy the land, they own the land. And people are quite happy to pick this up and stay on it. At least a lot of people along the NH34, NH24 in the Delhi NCR, I've seen them do this. Also, power connections are fixed in collusion with the authorities. A lot of, none of them live without power. They get power and groundwater supply. But the formal systems of power, water, sewerage, drainage is not in place. So why is illegal land cheaper? Because 40 to 45% of the formal land has to be allocated. If you had 100 acres, about 45 acres have to go into the parks, the roads, the infrastructure facilities, and so on. So actually, you get only about 55% of the land to sell as plots. But here, they are selling almost 75% of the land because they've shrunk all the other services and they don't match the development norms. Now, the peripheries of cities anyway are locationally cheaper. The city properties are 30 to 70% higher, depending on which part of the city you're talking about. When the farmer sells it to the developer, if they get into the formal system, they have to pay stamp duty, mutation, which is about 1% of the circle rate, 5 to 12% stamp duty. The builder to the plot buyer, again, there is a stamp duty and registration charges. The wait time for conversion, the landholding charges are 7 to 8%. Agricultural to residential, the betterment or development charges are about 2% of the circle rate. The services, the road width, instead of 4.5 to 6 meters, it should be 9 to 30 meters. Electricity should be urban instead of rural. And water supply lines have to be laid, not borewell supplies. Then no formal sewerage, drainage, and so on. And no allocation of 28% green towards green areas. So all this, you have shrunk the lifestyle. You have actually compromised the lifestyle, but you get a piece of land. And you can build on it and stay there. Now, in this next point is specifically to UP. where 1.26 hectares if there is an agricultural lagan on land. Normally land, there is agricultural land, there's no taxation, but there's an agricultural lagan in UP, but less than 1.26 hectares, even that is not there. And these lands, these colonies are not more, on more than 1.26 hectares. Then the RERA registration charges of 50,000 to 10 lakh per person, that is not there. EDC charges of 7.33% of the base price of property is not there. IDC charges are not there. So all this, what you should have paid is not paid, and therefore it's cheaper. So that is passed on to the consumer, and you get consumers to buy it. In cities like Ghaziabad, you can actually register and mutate the properties in the buyer's name with the municipal authorities. Now remember, municipal authorities are chronically starved of cash. So if anyone wants to register the property, they are quite happy to do so because it means money at the end of the day. But that's not so for the development authority. The development authorities are the ones that come and can raise them to the ground. If you take the example of Gurgaon, very large farmhouses which were on the periphery of the city were broken down very recently because, even smaller units were broken down. They're raised to the ground because they don't conform to the master plan. But the land still remains with the buyer. The buyer does not lose that land right, so he owns a piece of land. Then title documents are still a problem. The patronage from local MLAs always keeps them safe. As soon as there is a bank of people who have bought land, which is illegal in nature also, you have patronage from the local MLAs that keeps them safe. Let's look at the buyers who buy. They are small town buyers. For instance, I studied NH34, where there is a lot of plots available. And I found these are small town buyers, people from Muradnagar, Modi Nagar, and so on, who aspire to enter into Delhi city. Ghaziabad is the closest that they can get, and these are cheap plots of land. Then informal workers, they have been historically going from house to house. Finally, when they have been in the city for about 5 to 7 years, they look for ownership and they go for lands like this. Young professional migrant workers seeking to establish base in the city of employment near workplaces. This is typically in places like Pune, and I'll give you the example of Hinjewadi. In Hinjewadi, after the COVID, we spoke to a lot of plotted developers and brokers, and they said that most of the young professionals who have not been spending on transport, on entertainment, on travel, on many things that they would when during the lockdown and in the last 7 months, have a large and their salaries have not been significantly cut. They have a lot of money to invest, and
Jayashree, you have 5 minutes left.
Sure. I'm almost done. So they go and buy in places that are around Hinjewadi, and many of them are Gautan lands and things like that, which cannot be registered in their name. They can get some form of registration done. And they are okay with that because they don't intend to stay there. Many of them are planning to sell them. So what are the drivers for buying outside the legal framework? It is low budget. It's lack of awareness of consequences. Some of them really don't know that there are serious consequences. Then aspiration for ownership is one of the big things, and formal flats in low budgets, and this is a very recent phenomenon. Last 10 to 12 years, houses have not been handed over. Since RERA came in the last 2.5 years, a lot of flats have been handed over, and suddenly the buyers found that they're too small for comfort. So they feel that they want another option and not necessarily a built-up option. In apartments, the maintenance charges are too high. In plotted developments, the maintenance charges are perceived to be low. And there's no risk of construction delay. You bought a flat, you waited for even 12 years in the Delhi NCAER region because the construction was delayed. Here, there's not so much of a delay problem. And the small town mindset of landed property, that is something that is that continues, and it will continue for a longer period of time. And it's a futuristic and speculative purchase. So as a rule of thumb, plots as an investment, if you enter in the early stages, at least in 5 years, the values at least double. they hope for regularization of these colonies, knowing that sometime it will be regularized. There's very weak enforcement of rules by city authorities, and these are close to large infrastructure projects or employment hubs. So the potential of the land keeps going up, and they don't have know enough of where to check for the land titles and so on. Even though some basic titling and some basic websites have been created where you can check the titles. Then, being of rural stock, remember that agricultural land does not hold fear for them. So what happens if you purchase the land in a different zone? There is high risk of eviction. So these are the cases for legal purchases. Panchayat or DC approved land can be raised to the ground by government and leading to demolition. The titles can go disputed or go into litigation even after many years, because one person who was a child when the land was sold, when he attains maturity, can challenge this sale. So I think that more or less what's happening is that there is a unending thirst for land, and there is a significant disconnect between the amount of land that is in demand and the amount of land that cities are able to bring up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayashree. Now I invite Shreya to make her comments. Shreya, you can take 10 minutes in all.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor.
Ideally less than 10 minutes so that we have time for questions, answers.
Yeah, I'm going to try and do this less than 10 minutes. So thank you so much, NCAER.
Sorry, may I just intervene? Pardon me, Shreya. Yeah. Just because we started a little late and we also have a key ending address, with everybody's permission, we'll try to stretch this a little beyond 8. So Shreya, please have your time. I think it's important that we hear from you. So with the organizers' permission, let's just stretch this to maybe 8:15 or 8:20, or maybe even a little later than that, 8:30. So let's go ahead, Shreya, please. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, great.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to the NCER team for giving us this opportunity. And thank you both to Professor Kala and Jayashree for your papers. It was very interesting reading them. Had a very few comments on them. So in the first paper by Professor Kala, I think it's interesting to study the impact of homestays. This is definitely a growing trend. It's worth keeping an eye out for this, and novel data set being used. The model also was very interesting to see how the correlation is there. But as somebody who's just looking at this from outside, it felt like the sample size is going to be a key limitation, right? I mean, it's really hard to imagine that, let's say in a city like Mumbai, where you have millions of people living, a few hundred or even a few thousand Airbnb properties will actually affect the rental value. Is it's kind of hard to digest that. So I think it will be useful to dig deeper into, there's bound to be a city-wise variation. There's bound to be pockets within the cities where things will vary. And so maybe if there's a pin code level analysis which can be used, some level of spatial analysis at that level, I think that would be useful. So, I went, my colleague helped me look up the original Barron paper that you referred to. And, the one assumption that paper has is that you have to believe that a particular zip code has enough tourism activity going on there. And that is when the impact of Airbnb on those rental prices in that area really starts being significant. So, if in our context, I would imagine that if there are a lot of Airbnb rentals in, say, an Alibag or a Goa, they do affect the prices in those locations. But if I take up Mumbai, the main city of Mumbai, the impact is going to be, there are probably other economic factors affecting it. And then just stepping back, I think it's important there are other questions which come up around Airbnb. The legality of some of these Airbnb contracts, especially in our cities. What we do end up seeing is that, are the owners who are the ones who are giving the Airbnb contracts, or are these actually the tenants who are, subletting it? And often that's not allowed. So the legality of something like this, and especially as it grows, how do you handle that? Definitely a lot of safety and trust, concerns around this, and how those impact some of these listings and prices. And also, leading from this, is any sort of regulation or, policy oversight required as homestays in general increase? Of course, reading the paper brought makes me think about the larger questions around rental housing. So what would really drive supply, affordability, and that's something you referred to in the beginning of your paper. So it'll be, I think it's an interesting trend to watch out for. On the second paper by Jayashree, I thought it was a good overview of understanding how plots are, etc. are moving, how that market is moving, and how the inputs by industry experts. Just a minute. Apologies, my 2-year-old is is around here, and I think it's interesting that the Magicbricks data was, shows that how there is a demand for people interested in purchasing vacant plots, and rightfully there are a lot of pitfalls in buying such plots. People either don't care about legal approvals or are unaware, right? And both of these are issues. Contract enforcement is an issue. People believe they can manipulate the system. So I think this paper gives a good background and raises a number of important research questions. Hopefully, folks will pick those up because as, on one, officially we may be 30% urban in India, but unofficially lots of people say we are close to 60-70% urbanized. So there's a lot of green area around these periphery locations of our urban areas, a lot of gray transactions which are happening there. Clearly better urban planning is required. Also raises a number of important public finance questions, right? Is the exchequer losing money because of these sort of transactions? Or are we, is there an additional cost that's coming up because of unplanned development? What is the role that land administration infrastructure needs to play in this? And can better record keeping, better land records really lead to better planning and around these places? And lastly, I think it's important, question is that what is the role that the RERAs need to be playing here? The RERA's role is not only to protect the consumer's interest, but is also to promote the housing market in the real estate sector. So what role should RERAs be playing? Are they supposed to be a reactive role, or are they supposed to be anything proactive that the RERAs should be doing? And not just the RERAs, but multiple other government authorities also who manage these spaces. So those would again be, interesting questions to dig into. I think I've, met my time limit, Professor Singh, but thank you so much. And thank you for having me on this panel. Thank you.
So now or later, you are welcome to make more points. Sure. So as Dr. Shah indicated, we have enough time with us. Thank you. Thank you, Shreya. Thank you so much. So now I invite the speakers to respond to the comments, and then we will take questions and comments from the audience.
Could I just respond to Kala's and to Shreya's comments on them? I feel that Kala has picked up Airbnb. Today, there are many other channels like Airbnb. You have the Zolo, the OYO, and so on. And they all fit into the same category. They are actually rent aggregators. And you have a very large number of them, Nestaway and so on. Together, they impact rental markets. And we are studying them in great detail. But just Airbnb is very, very nascent in India, whereas these other, and not only homestays, it's not vacation homestays, it is aggregated rental housing that has significantly impacted the amount of money that the owner gets, and the rental returns are much better, about 3 to 4% better than other standard rental returns, and you also see that they impact the pricing of the entire market. So if you want a wider network, I would say use aggregated rental properties.
Okay, thanks, Jayashree. Dr. Ram Singh, may I respond to Shreya's comments? Shreya Deb's comments?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Shreya, for your reading of the paper and also for your very interesting and useful comments. See, I think that I also agree completely that 300 properties, maybe in cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai and all is actually very small to affect the Airbnb, the housing rental price and also the house price. But one secret which I did not conveyed during my presentation, which I have subsequently found out, okay, is that in Delhi, it's only 300, right? But there is a third party website called, there's a scraping website called AirDNA, okay. AirDNA gathers data on the actual number of active rentals during the past month, and also their occupancy and many other characteristics. In that, actually, you know what, Mumbai is 300 according to the Airbnb website, but as per AirDNA, it is 1259 rentals, active rentals in Mumbai, right? Similarly, in Delhi, there's a lot more, about 5,000 rentals. In Bangalore also, it's a lot more. So that is a much better data set for a researcher to go to compared to the Airbnb. But still, Shreya, I agree with you that 300, even 1,200, 5,000 also, compared to the existing housing units, and also the affordable housing crisis, and also the vacant housing stock, is still small. I agree. As like based on your suggestion for this pin code, zip code level data, I mean, I would be delighted if Omidyar Network can help me to get to the zip code level data, both for the tourist attractions, and also for the rental and the housing price market data, because I had quite a bit of difficulty getting to this. Jayashree, I completely agree with you that there are a lot of rental stay aggregators like Go, Ibibo, Make My Trip, OYO, and all that, but nobody has systematic data on the number of properties and also the monthly rent like Airbnb's website had. That is a major conditioning factor which actually determined the use of Airbnb for this data set. And Shreya, I completely agree with you on the safety concerns you flagged for this Airbnb guest. Actually, this is precisely what New York City did about maybe just before the start of the pandemic. The New York City folks basically said that all Airbnb guests have to declare their name, housing, their permanent address, where they are coming from, where they are going to, and whether or not they are having a bike, and what kind of transport they will be using while they are in New York City and all that. But Airbnb did not really like this, did not appreciate this regulation, and they said that it was an invasion of privacy, right? So that is one thing. So this, I think, also addresses the regulations part that you were talking about. If indeed this is really aggravating the affordable housing crisis, I mean, even though it is not statistically significant, when we account for all these endogeneity issues, I mean, economically and practically, I think Airbnb, Make My Trip, Goibibo, and all may still make a substantive difference to our urban housing market, where we have many homeless people, and at the same time many housing programs which have failed to create the number of housing units, and at the same time the coexistence of vacant housing units. Thanks a lot for your comments, Shreya. I really appreciate them.
Yeah, if I could just respond to what you said about the role of RERA. The RERA has a distinct development role. Just Andhra Pradesh is the only RERA where I've seen they've taken that development role very significantly, because they are very, their urbanization is very low. Telangana is far higher than that. But RERA RERA registration is required for even plotted development. It's not that the buyers don't know that these are not RERA registered plots. I think RERA has made a significant impact on the built up property markets where developers are involved and consumers do look for registration. But when it comes to plotted development, especially in the peripheries, they buy knowing that this is illegal plots, but that's all they can afford. A RERA registration, again, means conformity to the laws, and budget is the biggest driver. They cannot buy at these budgets anywhere in the city, and they know that they are outside the planning process.
Thank you, Jayashree. So let me now take some questions from the audience. I can see very distinguished audience who have tremendous knowledge of the housing, urban housing, and land-related issues. So I invite them to make their comments, ask questions. Please try to keep your comments, questions structured and pointed to the extent possible. I can see Sri K.P. Krishnan. Yes, please go ahead. Hello.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you to my thanks to both the presenters. Thoroughly enjoyed the papers. One quick question to Madam Kala. You said that the expectation is that bringing properties into Airbnb is likely to reduce the properties available for rental. Now, given what we have seen, at least in respect of cities which have rent control legislations, and the fact that a lot of properties are actually not in the rental markets. Two, what you yourself said, people staying in their own house, in addition to staying there, putting properties to, for Airbnb rental kind, would it not be plausible to argue that mechanisms like Airbnb actually increase the stock of units in the market for rental, whether it's a short-term rental or long-term rental, rather than reduce, because properties that were not earlier in the rental market are coming into the rental market? Would that not be a plausible question to look at? Locked up unused units being brought into the rental market. Second, my question is addressed to Madam Jayashree. Madam, you said 4 sets of reasons. The first one was the preference for land, but the fourth one was the exact opposite. Land as investment. Which of these is more likely to be true? Because this land as land, I would think is much more of a rural phenomenon. In urban India, would it be correct to say that there is a preference for land purely as land? You said emotional, sentimental type reasons. The other reasons that you brought out in terms of apartments, costs, maintenance, etc., clearly valid. But between 1 and 4, I thought there was a minor contradiction. That's it, Professor Singh. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we?
May I respond?
Yes, Kala. But let me. There's a question that has come from the audience, and that is a kind of supplement to what Mr. Krishnan asked.
Okay.
The question is. So let me take a look at the question. So question is. Can we assume that a higher number of listings means a lower availability of rental housing stock? Further,
I've already responded to that, Dr. Singh, in the chat box.
You have responded. So
yes,
for the benefit of larger audience, can you respond to it again?
Okay.
So that everybody gets it.
Right. So should I go ahead?
And let me just complete the reading. Further, can we say that whether Airbnb has an impact on housing stock reallocation? This is an important point, which is that listings are more likely in areas with large vacant housing stocks. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, good. So thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Krishnan, for your question. See, actually, you're absolutely right on the rent controlled properties. Actually, I was trying to get information on the rent controlled properties by city, but there is no data on this at all except a few papers. And I was very, very inspired by Sahil Gandhi's paper. Dr. Krishnan, you know that we were there on the same research consortium presentation, right? I think Sahil managed to get some data on rent control properties by city. So I need to tap his database for this. So that way we will know that even after controlling for these rent control properties, what will be the effect of Airbnb on housing rental price and the housing market in general. One. The second part of your question, see, I think, we have to make a distinction between tourists and guests to a city who will be consumers of the Airbnb accommodation and compare that with permanent residents of a city who happen to be tenants. And what the premise of my paper is that because of the monetary magnitude of monetary incentives involved, there is a bias in favor of the short-run tourists and guests against the long-term residents of the city, who are tenants and who are likely migrants, maybe who are young and who are still upcoming in their life. That is the bias I think we observed, if these estimates are correct. I hope that answers his question. Now, the answer on the Q&A box. Yeah, the question is that can we assume that a higher number of Airbnb listings mean a lower available rental housing stock? Yes, absolutely right. So if there are 100 houses, basically if Airbnb 60, it's not as neat as this, as Dr. Krishnan just mentioned. You have rent control properties and take away 20 rent control properties out of 100, take away 10 for Airbnb for Make My Trip, take away 5 for Goibibo, and you have about 15 properties, right? So in this, if 10 is taken away from by Airbnb out of the 15, you have only 5 left for rental, for permanent residents who want to relocate, who are looking for a job, who want to move to Delhi, Bangalore, or Chennai to study further, or things like that, right? So definitely a higher number of listings means a lower available rental stock, which could have been used for the other purpose, right? And the other question they are asking is, can we say whether Airbnb has an impact on the housing stock reallocation? Listings are more likely with in areas with large vacant housing stock. See, our assumption here is that the Airbnb rental price will be one big incentive for landlords and property owners to list their property, right? And that is the assumption we make in this model. And as I think Shreya also mentioned in her set of comments, the tourist market is the one which drives the Airbnb. That is what we found in our paper, that only in tourist areas that the Airbnb listings are very high, the Airbnb rents are also very high. So the assumption is those areas are likely to be characterized by probably more severe affordable housing crisis. Thank you.
If I could respond to Mr. Krishnan's comments.
Yes, please go ahead.
There are two things that I would like to talk to you about. In Bangalore, a lot of people who bought houses and found that they were smaller, and they have started picking up plotted developments near the corridors where they were. And this was the first, what my first reference was. The second reference is when you buy in the peripheral areas. These are mostly outside the master planned areas. Yamuna Expressway, the airport is coming up. You can see that a lot of cookie cut plots of unconverted land is being sold. And the buyers here are the ones I'm referring to. These are people who are from smaller cities, Agra, Etawah, smaller cities like that. And they buy in the periphery of the cities. And for them, that land means an entry into the city. They don't want to buy a house in the city. At some point of time, they do want to touch the parent city, and they are the ones who buy. And that is the emotional connect that I talked about. They are used to agricultural land. They don't mind picking up a plot near the city. It is like a toehold in the city. And that is happening in city after city. The people from the city buy mostly in suburban areas, and it's the smallest town people or those in the informal sector that I've seen buying in the peripheral areas as in the first go.
Okay, so at the moment, I'm going to use my prerogative as a chair, and I will ask one or two questions each to each speaker, but I will formalize issues that have come up in previous questions. My question to or comment to Dr. Kala is that there is a lot of seasonality in Airbnb rentals. So there's a weekend effect, and there's a seasonalities. Different seasons have different demand. That shows up in Airbnb rental charges. So when you, in your empirical analysis, when you say rental rents, are you talking about annual rents, or you have some kind of seasonality also factored in your analysis. The other question is that the issue of endogeneity is a serious issue here. So, and it has come up in comments by Shreya, it has come up in comments by Sri Krishnan. How have you addressed this issue, and if you have addressed it, and to what extent? So my questions to Jayashree would be that, you know, what you described in terms of what happens inside of inside of the master plan versus outside. If you look at the nature of investment, you explained very well that the investment outside of the boundary, near boundary, but outside of the boundary of master plan, that investment is riskier on several counts. Okay. Yet, what is interesting is that it's the small size buyers, shallow pocket buyers that are making investment, which is riskier, as opposed to this richer investors in property plots. They are making less risky investments. So do you think it's mostly the pocket size, which is their inability of small size buyers, shallow pocket buyers, their inability to buy inside of the master plan that is driving this effect? Or there are some other, do you have some explanation along the lines of riskiness? From economic point of view, if you have a deeper pocket, you can afford to take riskier risk, so to speak. But here completely opposite is happening. So is it the purchasing power or their inability to get loans, required size loan from banking sector? That is the explanation, main explanation behind this, this outcome. You may respond now.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible?
Always, yes.
Okay, okay, good. So actually, thank you, Dr. Ram Singh, because I have to preempt the work that I'm already doing on revising this paper. And we are actually using a different measure of Airbnb here. We are actually trying to look at Airbnb density, which is an indicator used by other papers. So Airbnb density means, so we take care of Shreya's comment as well here, which means that you look at Airbnb properties as a proportion of the total number of housing units in a city. Right. So look at the Airbnb density rather, and look at the determinants of Airbnb density. So if you assume that Airbnb density is endogenous, and you basically look at the rent of 1-star hotels, 2-star hotels, 3-star hotels, 4-star hotels, and so these are the kind of per capita income is the biggest instrument that we can use in order to instrument this Airbnb thing, because we found that there is a very, very strong and positive effect that this per capita income of a city has on Airbnb density. So we are using a two-stage instrumental variable estimations method by taking these instruments, estimating the Airbnb density, and then plugging in the predicted value of this in the original equation and re-estimating it. So that's what we are doing. But I mean, that's a different paper. But since you asked, I had to preempt those revisions and just tell you that here. Thank you.
Okay, and so, and also, what is your definition of rent?
Yeah, the seasonality. Yeah, the seasonality part. I'm sorry, actually, I cannot control for seasonality. You're absolutely right. But whatever data I got from makan.com on rentals and this housing price was for rent, it was monthly rent, right? Monthly rent. So
Okay.
I won't be able to know which month it was. And similarly for this, it is a thing which is annual for the house price per in rupees per square feet, right?
Okay.
So I won't get any seasonality there. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Dr. Ram Singh, your questions to me. The risk that people take when they buy peripheral localities, and I was talking about the people, budget is a very big consideration, and for them it is not the risk so much as getting a place to stay. They would otherwise have to grab land somewhere and put a juggi or something like that. Here, they are able to purchase something, and in many cases, the builder, and I'll take the example of the NH34, that is a fantastic study module. There are so many plotted developments, none of them authorized, and all of these are very well occupied. It's densely populated and occupied, people staying there for about 15, 16 years. Why do they do that? Because the developer has connects with the political local political people, and he's able to protect them from a lot of breakage and things like that. So he becomes the patron there, and these people do buy because they work in small. Ghaziabad is a industrial town. There are a lot of small scale industries, and many of the people who have lived there for a long time, they are sure that that's the place where they want to stay. And these are people who come from the hinterland. They are small town people who come, have worked for a while. They want to stay in that city. They've decided to stay. There is a security of tenure, so they stay there. It's not a risk for them. It is the opportunity to buy, to enter the formal housing market. And whether it is informal or formal, as far as the planning process goes, they know that some point of time they will be regularized. And that is what I meant by saying that unless you stop this regularizing of unauthorized colonies, or you address it in the early stages, you will find that you can't actually displace about thousands of people from one corridor when all of them have political patronage as well. So this is one thing. The investors who buy, and this I have noticed in Ghaziabad, and this I have noticed in Hyderabad. Both these places, a lot of land is bought whenever there is a large infrastructure project that's announced. For instance, the Pharma City was announced in Hyderabad, and people from all the small towns, they bought into those lands around there. They don't want large pieces of land. They buy the cookie cut plots and they just leave it there. Most people there in the small towns, they buy this land and they keep it, hold it for 5, 7, 10 years, sometimes even up to 15, 20 years, because they want it for a daughter's wedding or a child's education. You want to send them abroad. Most of them want to send their children abroad. By that time, this land would have appreciated significantly. Recently, the government has intervened and has started clamping down with laws. I expect that this will moderate very soon in Hyderabad. In Ghaziabad, I don't see any such new norms by the government. I think it is there to stay. It is continuing, and it will continue for a long period of time, because Ghaziabad city is the employment hub, and they want to migrate from rural to urban. They'll buy it and they'll leave it there for a child to come or something like that.
So thank you. But Jayashree, when I said the riskiness of investment, I didn't mean that they will fear being dispossessed from these properties, from these plots or apartments. As you said that people make investment in these plots to meet expenses of their daughter's wedding, or fund education, higher education of their sons or children. It's the commercial risk that is there. When you ask a question, can you predict value of a property outside of a master plan boundary versus a property that is inside? If you ask a question, if you frame the risk in terms of value of property that will be there after 5 years, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the outside of boundary properties seem to be riskier. Whether they will be regularized or not, whether they will get proper power connection, water supply or not. So those risks are of higher order for these and it's that risk I was talking about.
I understand, but the fact is that the ones who invest there don't intend to stay there. Whether the water comes or not, whether the power comes or not, they're not bothered. There is always a buyer for that plot. Historically, and it will continue for some more time, there is a buyer for that plot. And then if you announce the industrial corridor, the city master plans those corridors into the city after a period of 10, 15 years. And that is what they are banking on. When they buy.
All right, thank you. Yes, thanks. Thank you all. Thank you. Special thanks to the paper presenters, commentators, and the audience. Thank you all. Thank you so much for this lively, interactive, wonderful session.
Thank you, Professor Ram Singh, Jayashree, Kurup, Sridhar, for these wonderful papers, and Shreya Deb for her comments.